This is Extinguishing the Stars, written by G.S. Jensen, narrated by Piper Down. Copyright 2024 by G.S. Jensen. Interstellar Space, Maristelle Galaxy, Shapley Supercluster, Amaranthe. The two neutron stars shone in luminous blue-white X-rays as they orbited one another like tethered weights spun round a post. Lyran's sphere acted as both high-powered telescope and protective bubble, providing him breathable air, radiation protection, and a layer of gravity to keep his orientation steady. He enjoyed the imminent kilonova from a safe distance of 0.3 megaparsecs, comfortably situated in interstellar space between Orion 4 and, well, not much else for a while. The neutron star's orbits grew frenzied, and even with the telescope's extreme magnification, he could scarcely detect any separation between the stars. It shouldn't be long now. I always find you in the damnedest places. Lyran turned to see Deputy Director of State Security Genova Colonnay standing near the far wall of the sphere, the shimmer of a Spazi-porta fading away behind her. She wore the charcoal-emblazoned jacket of her office over double-wrapped white pants. Above the jacket's arched collar, her eyes glinted teal, bleeding to silver. He liked them better the old way. "You're not supposed to be finding me at all, Jen. You promised." "I did. And I've honored my promise for, 10 years now? I wouldn't seek you out if it wasn't a matter of utmost importance." "Oh, more important than the opportunity to witness the Norcene-Aki merger as it occurs?" He gestured behind him just as a burst of light bathed the sphere in a dazzling glow. His shoulders sagged as he shifted toward the neutron stars, or former neutron stars, for beneath a rapidly expanding wave of radiation, they'd crashed into one another to create a newborn black hole. "I missed it," he muttered. "The sphere can play it back for you. Have it send you the file, and you can watch it as many times as you want." He exhaled carefully, trying to keep his voice steady as he faced her, because getting into a shouting match with his ex-wife while suspended in a translucent bubble deep in the void 400 parsecs from home was ludicrous, even for the two of them. It's not the same. When you've lived for as long as I have, watching such an event as it happens is one of the few things that still has the power to move me. "I'm sorry. I remember how you loved the spectacles." She didn't look sorry, but she did look uncommonly grim. "Lyran, I wouldn't have used the bond. I wouldn't have spoiled your celestial party if it wasn't—" "Important, yes, you mentioned that." He crossed his arms against his chest. "Fine. Show's over, so you might as well enlighten me." "I will." She extended a hand, though she surely didn't intend for him to take it. "Come with me, back to the office." "Not until you tell me why." "Because—" Her lips curled in the way they did when she was about to say something she'd really rather not. "You're the only one I trust to save us." "Us? Who is us? The government? Your lackeys?" "Everyone." A host of alien warships, tens of thousands strong, teemed in the narrow corridor between Mantanu and its dual moons. Small ships, large ships, but most of all, truly enormous ships. Lyran picked one out and measured its length at greater than 5 kilometers. The shapes and hull configurations varied, but all were constructed of a large aubergine metal that reflected almost no light. He blinked. Had two of the vessels just divided? He replayed the scene in his mind. A seam had raced down the center of the ship until it split in two, then replicated its other half, akin to cellular mitosis. Now that he knew what to search for, he realized it was happening everywhere. Ships merged and broke apart with abandon, or as needed for their purposes, which at present revolved around laying waste to the colony below. Lyran set the sphere's telescope to pan across the planet's surface and catalog the damage. No, not damage, but destruction, on a scale none recovered from. All 5 metropolitan areas had been leveled, including— He winced as his view panned across the broken remains of the city, Quansipe. A restaurant on the bay there, served the finest seafood in 12-star systems, best enjoyed alongside a one-of-a-kind exotic cocktail. Founded by star-mad explorers who'd flown off in search of habitable worlds on the far side of the galaxy, Mantanu had thrived as their most distant colony for more than 2 millennia. 50 million people called it home. According to Genova, less than 3 million had escaped the invasion, and now the planet was overrun with these machines, these Rasu, as the military had named them. Limited Spaziporta evacuations continued on the surface, but they couldn't risk a Rasu sneaking through and painting a bullseye on Elakrin's location. So most of those who still lived below would inevitably die. His people had always been of an eminently practical nature, except for the odd star-mad explorer anyway. The government was not about to choose to save 1,000 lives if doing so jeopardized its plan to save 1 billion. A willingness to buy into the manner of cold calculus wasn't the only reason he and Genova had parted ways, but it was on the list. Liren glanced at the coordinates she'd provided him and punched the next ones into the system. The sphere tunneled away through the manifold and popped out 2 galaxies over. A massive Rasu dreadnought soared 50 meters above his head, and he fought the primal urge to flee in a panic, but he was a mere speck of dust, and they were no more likely to notice him than they would a wandering clump of hydrogen gas. On second thought, one of them might, for there were at least, he couldn't begin to count, hundreds of thousands of ships, at a minimum. No planet under siege registered on the scans, so this appeared to be the Rasu in their natural habitat. The insistent hum of self-preservation instincts won out, and he made a tactical retreat to a third set of coordinates. Here it was so much worse. He was barely able to make out the local star through all the warships. His mind returned to the speech Genova had delivered before sending him out to see for himself. We spent the first 60 years after discovering the existence of the Rasu watching them from afar as they attacked, defeated, and annihilated species after species. We studied how they fought and searched for weaknesses and found none. We wargamed scenarios and researched new weapons to target their unique makeup. In the end, our best military minds came to a stark conclusion: none of it would be enough. See, the Rasu don't die. If an atom of Rasu remains, it can join up with another atom, then another, until it can reform itself into a weapon or a ship, or whatever it needs to be in order to rejoin the fight. They've clogged stellar systems, entire galaxies with their life-infused material, so there is no location we can target in a preemptive strike to wipe them out. We stand a decent chance of defeating them in a single encounter, but our resources are not unlimited. Theirs are. Liren, we cannot defeat this enemy. Gods, he hated it when she was right. With a sigh, he initiated the sphere's shutdown procedures and walked through a Spaziporta into Genova's office. So what's plan B? I assume that's why I'm here. She affixed her thumbprint to a pad an aide held out to her, then ushered the aide out the door and turned to him. You appreciate the threat we're facing now? I came back, didn't I? You did. Thank you. Yes, plan B. Once we realized we couldn't defeat the Rasu, not even should we construct a fleet, 100 million strong, we shifted our attention to our next best hope. Eluding them. You want to hide? He asked. Want to? She shook her head. No. Must? Yes. Over 1 billion people live on this planet. Hundreds of millions live in the colonies. We can't evacuate. No, we cannot. Damn it, Jen, what are you getting at? Why am I here? We've invented a way to hide Elakri, where the Rasu will never find it, she replied. We began constructing a machine that will enable us to do so some years ago, though crucial details of how it would function remained unresolved. Last week, the scientist in charge of the project, Dr. Evaim Kenzu, announced he had solved the final challenge preventing the machine's completion. The next day, he disappeared. Oh, everything made more sense now. You need me to find him? Great. Send me the file and we already know. Not where he is, but who he's with. His daughter fell in with Santi United. He went after her. No, he groaned, banging his head against the wall behind him. Do not do this to me, Jen. There might have been a flash of empathy in her eyes before it vanished beneath a mask of steely resolve. I'm absolutely doing this to you, Lirin. The fate of our entire species rests on Dr. Kenzu completing his work. Nothing else matters, least of all personal history, yours, mine, or anyone else's. Find Dr. Kenzu and bring him home. Elakri, Elakri, homeworld, Maristelle Galaxy. Lirin strode briskly along the banks of the Praska tributary as the sun melted into the horizon, casting the promenade in dusk light. He'd walked away from his life once because of Santi United, or rather because of the group's leader, Mace Campana. Walked away from Genova and from a fulfilling government job he was damn good at when that government had ordered him to execute a man he'd come to love like a brother. It shouldn't have gone the way it did. He was no stranger to undercover missions, and he'd known what the score would be going in. The upstart rebels had no compunction about employing violence to further a cause heavy on emotional appeals and light on specifics. Government, bad. Freedom, good. Repression couldn't stand, and so on. While Lirin tended to agree with the sentiments, as a rallying cry, it was a trite spiel, spouted by every agitator bearing a grudge. But Mace had a way about him. He exuded the kind of presence that didn't merely draw people to him, but made them want to follow the man off a cliff and into the underworld. Lirin had escaped the mission with his soul intact, but solely because he'd refused to pull the trigger. Instead, he'd spun a tale for Mace that was more truth than lie about needing to step away for personal reasons, wished the insurrectionists of Santi United the best, and vanished. It seemed in the intervening 10 years no one else had succeeded in getting close enough to the group's leader to finish the job. And now, to save his home and his people, Lirin was going to have to go back into that world, look Mace in the eye, and betray the man for a second time. A message arrived containing the information he'd been waiting on. Best get on with it, then. The location of the Santi United headquarters was a closely held secret, known only to its most loyal members, but learning it had been a trivial matter for Lirin. He'd simply asked. The mid-rise building buried deep in the industrial district blended in with the dozen surrounding buildings structured identically to it. The name on the entrance corresponded to a legal registered company that paid its taxes promptly every year. The external surveillance cams and cloaked drone lasers faded into the architecture so well he almost didn't spot them. He opened the front door and walked up to the receptionist behind the counter. Industrial offices didn't typically maintain a live greeter, which meant the woman was a lookout, and possibly an assassin if the need arose. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked flatly. "Yes, Lirin Toffin. I'm here to see Mace Campana. He's expecting me?" Her polite countenance hardened. "I'm sorry, sir. You have the wrong address. No one by that name works here." "Of course they don't. I'll wait while you contact him." Her gaze evaluated him for weaknesses, while one hand moved beneath the counter. After 5 seconds, the hand returned to view. "Apologies, but we must take precautions. Someone will be up to escort you." "Thank you." The lobby contained nothing to entertain guests, so he stared at the wall and waited. He didn't work to prepare himself mentally for the task ahead. Just because it had been a few years since he'd worked undercover didn't mean he'd forgotten how to slip into a persona. Besides, the more natural he acted, the more apt Mace was to believe the act. A door to the left opened, and a man in a gray uniform emerged. The telltale shimmer of a defensive shield distorted the air as he entered. "Sir, if you'll follow me." He trailed the man through a maze of unadorned hallways and down 2 lifts before they arrived at a set of reinforced doors. His escort pivoted to him, gaze flicking over the contours of his body. "I'll need to search you. No weapons allowed." "I'd expect nothing less." Lirin spread his arms and legs wide and waited while the man ran a sensor over his body. Once satisfied, the man entered a complicated pattern on the control panel, and the doors slid apart. "Ah, This was more like it. A wide open space stretched out before him, divided into the kind of groupings preferred by insurrectionists. To the left, a physical training area included combat bots arranged on a cushioned mat in front of a scaling wall and ranged weapon targets. Past it, a stocked armory lay behind a locked mesh fence. In the middle, meeting and planning spaces were arranged between movable half-walls. The final area sported a food dispersion line and a smattering of tables. "Liren, my friend!" He turned in time to have a second's warning before Mace wrapped him up in a hug and lifted him off the floor. "Oof," he grunted into Mace's shoulder until the founder and leader of Santi United set him down and stepped back. Mace was a bear of a man, with arms as thick as most people's legs and a broad-barreled chest. His pale blonde hair was tied at the nape, revealing twinkling amber to crimson eyes and a visage that always seemed to be on the verge of smiling. Charismatic had never done the man justice. Liren held out his arm. "A proper greeting is in order, I think." "Indeed!" Mace grasped his arm at the elbow, as he did in turn, and they held the gesture for a beat. "Now then, walk with me, and tell me what has taken you so long to return to my side." He fell in beside the man, unconsciously lengthening his stride to keep up. "Forgive me, I had some sulking to do." 10 years is a long time to sulk, my friend, even over a woman. Mace had never known Genova's true name or identity, nor the real reason for their breakup. Everything the man believed he knew about Liren was a fiction, an artificial construct, but the best lies were always centered on truth. She was a demon of a woman. "Fair enough. I won't beat you about the head too much over it, on one condition." Mace drew to a stop with the grace of a man half his size and faced Liren. "Your message said you wanted to rejoin us in our cause. Is this true?" Liren made a show of nodding slowly, carefully. "I've seen things out there these last few years. It's getting worse. I can't, in good conscience, stay out of the fight any longer." A radiant smile broke across Mace's face. "And I'm so glad to have you back in it. You couldn't have picked a better time to come to your senses." "Okay, you have something in the works?" He reminded himself that he didn't care. His task was to find and free Dr. Kenzu and his daughter. "We do." Mace shifted toward the unmarked door they'd happened to stop in front of, then back to Liren. "Though you left us long ago, you never betrayed me, when you likely had many opportunities to do so. I trust you for this reason, above all." He pressed a palm to the pad beside the door and underwent a retina scan. The door slid back to reveal a lab most scientists dreamed of working in. Pristine, state-of-the-art equipment surrounded an LRA-42 quantum computer, followed by a long row of workstations. The rear half of the room, however, more closely resembled an advanced assembly line. A sequence of robotic arms plucked items he could only guess at the purpose of out of cushioned trays and seated them in a small glass clamshell one by one. To the left of the assembly line, 8 orbs, closed clamshells, he realized, rested in padded containers. As he watched, an arm suspended from the ceiling grasped the topmost containers and moved it into what looked like a containment box. "What are these?" "We have not taken the time to give them a charming name, but they are, in effect, dimension-tearing bombs. When they detonate, they rip open the very fabric of the space-time manifold, like so." Mace wound his fingers together, then flung them apart. "And they are so tiny, one can be delivered to a target in someone's pocket. Should that person be searched or scanned, it will be mistaken for a personal multi-tool." Dread pooled in Liren's gut. He didn't want to know this, any of this. He was not here to bring Santi United down, not today. "What are your targets?" "Ultimately, High Square, and other major government buildings, including the orbital. First, though, we plan to engage in a test run tomorrow. Poetic, really, for the test target to fall into our laps in a bit of cosmic serendipity." "How's that?" Liren asked. "I have recruited many brilliant scientists over the years, but this weapon here, it is deep space magic. My people got close to making it work, but the last few obstacles, notably how to ensure the bomb doesn't trigger a runaway detonation that destroys the planet, proved to be too much for them, so I recruited a new scientist, Elakrin's foremost expert on astro-dimensional physics. So the daughter had been a trap, one Dr. Kenzu had easily fallen into. Family was every man's weakness. What did you offer him? Those types don't usually care about politics. Their noses are too buried in math equations to notice the real world spinning on around them. True. I offered him the life of his daughter. Liren crossed his arms against his chest and glared at Mace. You know I don't approve of those sorts of tactics. Neither do I, my friend, neither do I. But time was running short, and it was the only way. Don't worry, the daughter won't be harmed. Mind you, her father doesn't know this, and it's all worked out beautifully. Doubly so, since he provided us with our test target. And what is the test target? Liren asked, though some part of him already knew. A secretive machine the government has been pouring billions of credits into developing. They claim it's going to save us from some alien menace. Mace motioned grandly around the lab. Have you seen any aliens? Because I have not seen any aliens troubling us with violent intent. Liren worked to keep his voice casual. I haven't bumped into any lately. No. Exactly. It's a lie. Same as everything the government proclaims. They will undoubtedly use this machine to tighten their hold upon us, which is why we will destroy it before we destroy them. A traitorous thought burst free into Liren's mind, wiping away years of cobwebs and time-softened nostalgia. He should have assassinated Mace 10 years ago. The man's charisma and easy charm had a sadistic, cold-blooded soul. For all his jaded experience, Liren had fallen under the same spell everyone who met Mace did, and it left him blinded by a manufactured friendship that had never truly existed. Though it stung his pride, the realization was for the best. It made what he was now going to have to do so much easier. He grinned and clapped Mace on the back. You've been busy doing great things in my absence. I'm not certain what I can do to help at this point. Your presence alone is a difference maker. You gird my resolve and give me hope for our future. Also, you are a master at close quarters combat, should the need arise. Well, in that case, he chuckled lightly. Listen, it sounds like you're on a tight schedule, and I'm taking you away from important work. No, Mace shrugged. Perhaps a little. As I suspected. Are any of the old crew around? Many, yes. Sharon, Alade, Bracken, too. Terrific. Mind if I wander around and see who I can bump into? Not at all. Let's meet up for a quick meal in, say, an hour? Sounds good. Oh, but... Mace pointed to the containers holding the assembled clamshells. Stay clear of the bombs. We're running final tests today, so they are in an active state. Wouldn't want to blow ourselves up right before our big moment. No, we wouldn't. Liren headed in the direction of the common area, not looking over his shoulder to see where Mace went. It didn't matter. As soon as he rounded a corner, he reached under his shirt, as if scratching an itch on his stomach, and tapped in a pattern on the ceramic sheet melded to his skin. The device had sent out pulses to map the layout of the building as he and Mace had walked, and now it delivered a schematic to his virtual vision. He grayed out the areas he'd seen, which left the rear third of the facility. Most of it was divided into discrete rooms, presumably lodging and storage. In the far right corner, however, was a space 10 by 10 meters where the pulses couldn't penetrate. Genova was correct. He was the only person capable of getting this done. Mace trusted him, and that mistake would be the man's undoing. Despite recognizing how Mace had to be stopped, in truth had always needed to be stopped, residual guilt insisted on twisting up his insides, even as he took full advantage of the man's trust to bluff and obfuscate his way into the far reaches of the facility. Liren rounded the corner to the rear hallway to find a security guard stationed outside the shielded room. He was already smiling when the guard pivoted toward him and moved a hand to his sidearm. Hey, aren't you, Sylvesti? Liren asked. I think I remember you from back in the day. I don't know you. Sure you do. It's been a while. You were just a scruffy kid when I came through here the first time. You're all grown up now, I see. When he was a meter away, he held out his hand in greeting. The guard looked down at it, and Liren swung his other arm up. A blade slid out from beneath the skin of his wrist and stabbed the guard in the ear, penetrating well into the brain. He grappled the dying man by the waist and eased him to the floor. The blade's narrow profile meant there wasn't much blood yet, but he nonetheless took care to avoid the wound. He pocketed the guard's sidearm, better safe than sorry, then stood and flattened his palm on the room's access control panel. White, blue light leaked out from the edges of his hand, and his skin tingled from the continual electrical shocks he delivered to override the panel. The shield fizzled and shut down. The next second, the door opened. A man and a younger woman sat on the floor, their foreheads touching while the man stroked the young woman's cheek, but their attention leapt to him when he stepped inside. The woman scurried back to the wall. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes marred wan features drawn tight against the bones of her face. "I've given you everything you need," the man said wearily. "Don't ask anything more of me. I beg you." "One more thing, if I can." Liren instantiated a spaziporta beside him. It led to Genova's office, because where else was he going to send them? "Get out of here, both of you." I don't understand." "This is a rescue. I'm saving you so that you can save everyone." "What?" "Ah, I see." Dr. Kenzu vaulted to his feet, eyes blazing to life with the vigor of the newly redeemed as he helped his daughter up. "Thank you, stranger." "No time. Go." He circled around to physically urge them through the opening. Once they were gone, he stared at the office on the other side for a beat, then shut the spaziporta down. He wasn't done yet. Liren was betting that the intensive nature of the work being performed in the weapons lab required its own independent power supply. The LRA-42 alone would draw more power than the rest of the building. The generator should be situated near the lab, for distance mattered in hardwired electricity distribution. He followed the heat map his schematic provided into a maintenance corridor, grateful to be out of sight of wandering Santi members. He'd hauled the guard's body into the vacated cell and closed the door, but he didn't have long before the jailbreak was discovered. He needed to move quickly. As expected, the generator room was tucked behind the lab. An opaque rectangle of dimpled charcoal metal sat at the center of the room. Inside its walls, exotic forces crashed into each other at near light speed to generate energy. A series of tubes fed two daisy chains of smaller rectangles, and at the end of the chains, thick cables merged together to disappear into a funnel through the far wall. For this much power and this delicate of an operation, wireless transmission didn't get the job done. Liren shivered as he climbed over the tubes. The room was insulated, and the temperature hovered near freezing. Once he reached the wall, he deployed his blade again, grabbed the cables with his other hand, and worked the blade through them. The insulation embedded in his forearms absorbed the current leaping from the optical fibers onto the surface of the blade, and the floor was safety rubber, designed to absorb stray voltage. Still, he held the severed cables out away from him as he clambered back toward the door, not dropping them until he could leap out of the room. He sprinted down the maintenance corridor and slipped into the main hallway. Every minute counted. The power remained on in the facility, but an alarm pealed through the hall. Now in public view, he headed straight for the weapons lab. The doors hung half open, and beyond them the lab was pitched into shadow. Techs scrambled around ineffectually, as was often the case when equipment simply stopped working. Off to the left, Mace gestured animatedly to a man wearing a bright yellow frock. Liren stepped back into the shadows and sent Genova a message. "Use the bond and find me. I need a targeted laser strike at my location in 30 seconds. Tight beam, 40 by 40 meters wide. We've secured Dr. Kenzu and his daughter. Thank you. I mean it. Laser strike, 25 seconds. Liren, I can't call in a strike that fast. I need 2 minutes at a minimum." "So be it." "Understood. Give me 20 seconds warning." The man in the frock scurried off into the murky depths of the lab, and Liren emerged from the shadows to stride over to Mace,
What happened? The bloody power in the lab went out. The shift manager thinks the tests they were running might have overloaded the circuits, but it shouldn't have. We're supposed to be past those sort of problems. I swear if Dr. Kenzu led us astray, I will make him watch while I peel his daughter's fingernails off one by one.
And with that, the residual guilt bid a swift departure.
It was probably a glitch with some settings. These things happen.
Mace glanced at him, agitation dancing in his eyes.
I can't afford glitches. Not now.
2 workers ran past them, almost bumping into Liren, and he urged Mace toward a quieter corner.
Let's get out of their way and let them work. You're right. Me yelling at everyone distracts them from fixing the problem.
Mace huffed a breath.
Huh, it's good you're here. I'd forgotten what a calming influence you can be. My ex-wife would disagree with your characterization, but I'm happy to hear it.
Mace's focus was drawn to 2 women talking outside the lab doors, and he nonetheless started to rush over to them. Liren's hand darted out to touch Mace's arm.
So the lab has its own power supply?
What?
Yes. We experienced regular brownouts in the rest of the facility once we brought the LRA-42 online, so we had it installed. 20 seconds. Get out of there, Liren. Smart thinking.
In one fluid motion, he extended the blade from his wrist and did what he should have done 10 years earlier. He stabbed Mace Campana in the base of the neck. The blade pierced through to the windpipe, so the man couldn't cry out. Liren wrapped his arms around the man and held him up. This time the blood didn't matter, only delaying any attention swinging their way until the last possible moment. He waited another 5 seconds, then dropped Mace to the floor, opening a spazi porta behind him, and dove through it. Deep within the peaks of the Cornice Mountains, a tangle of curving alabaster rods intertwined to form a porous orb, suspended 100 meters in the air by a towering lattice frame. Below it, an intrastellar sublight engine waited to be fitted to the orb. Hundreds of drones buzzed around the assembly, attaching the final components and sealing up the joints. Workers moved on the scaffolding as well, here and there, likely checking behind the drones. They'd only get one shot at this, so mistakes were not something they could leave to chance. Beneath a covered tent off to the left, Dr. Kenzu paced intently, stopping every so often to gesture at the wide bank of screens displaying 1,000 measurements while a dozen underlings followed with rapt attention. Beaten and weak in his cell at Santi United, the man now exuded the confidence and energy of the brilliantly driven. The new lease on life probably didn't hurt either, and Kenzu would want to make certain it lasted. They were calling the machine the Piega Stray, which meant folded layers in one of their ancient tongues, for this was what it did, fold the layers of the space-time manifold around itself, or rather, around a much larger field the machine generated, with itself at the center. Liren didn't comprehend all the science. His love of astronomy was an amateur's appreciation. But as it had been explained to him, the machine tore a hole in the manifold, much the way a spaziporta did, and burrowed inside to form a cavity. The physical dimensions leaked into the cavity, creating a chamber of real space inside. Then, the pieste, as people in a hurry had taken to calling it, sealed the entry point. The pocket of space it created became its own universe, cut off from the one that had birthed it, and nothing from the greater cosmos outside could access it. Whether anything located in the pocket universe could ever claw its way back out was apparently still to be determined. When researchers shut off miniature test versions of the pieste, everything trapped within stayed gone. With no ability to access the pocket, no one knew whether what was inside had gotten squashed into nothingness or if, instead, it continued to exist beyond their reach. Dr. Kenzu insisted he'd calculated equations that promised to reverse the process, to punch a new hole back into real space, at which point the pocket universe would unfold like the petal of a flower in spring. But time was short, and testing those equations had to wait for the other side. Hell of a risk they were taking, vanishing from the universe with no guaranteed way to return, but when the alternative was extinction, few risks were too great.
It's raining, you know.
One corner of his mouth twitched in a half-smile. Genova took too much pleasure from ambushing him with a trenchant remark.
I happen to enjoy nature in all its forms. Yes, but you're wet. And now so am I. A personal choice on your part.
He tore his gaze from the pièce to consider her.
What's the update?
We arrested 34 people at the site you identified as the Santi United headquarters. 6 later died from injuries sustained in the strike. All told, the death toll stands at 18. She sighed. It would have been easier to simply hit the entire building. Why did you risk your life in order to save as many terrorists as possible?
Life is long, or it will be if the pièce works, and they deserve a chance at redemption. Mace was a magnetic figure. Freed of his influence, many of them may find they're not quite so dedicated to Santi's cause as they believed. I hate that most of the scientists and techs died, but I didn't have time to engineer a way to get them out of the lab while ensuring Mace died and I lived. At least you ensured the last one. Careful, Jen. I might start to believe you've missed me.
A few more days in your company,
and I might start to believe it myself, which would be a mistake, he cautioned.
Without a doubt. Amusement flickered across her eyes, only to vanish beneath a storm of disquiet.
Oh no. What?
She held up a hand to stave off further questions while she spoke to whomever resided on the other end of her comms. Her attention darted to Dr. Kenzu and his underlings, then to the launch assembly. The bulk of the Rasu Armada sieging Mantanu have departed. Based on their past behavior, we have every reason to believe they plundered the databases in the colony, which means they now know everything about us,
including the location of Elakri. Yes. Wormholes? Of course. It's a trivial matter for them to be here.
Her gaze flitted briefly to the gray, laden clouds above.
Now, I need to go.
She ran off toward Kenzu's tent, leaving Liren standing alone in the rain. Fighters fashioned from liquid silver spun through enemy fire to race along the dreadnought's hulls, dropping antimatter bombs in their wake, then darting out of the blast radius when possible. Structured formations had long since broken down, but clusters of warships fired upon the chunks of Rasu that remained from the explosions, tearing them into smaller and smaller pieces in a desperate bid to delay their ability to reform. The Elakri military counted as the largest and strongest ever encountered until the Rasu, but it could not win the day. No, this was a delaying tactic and nothing more. The fleet had rushed out to meet the Rasu at the edge of the solar system upon their arrival. Every countermeasure had been deployed to stall the enemy's advance, and their forces held nothing back. No soldier who fought on the battlefield today would ever return home. The pièce's reach extended for 2.3 AU. It would travel as close to the sun as was deemed safe before activating, thus bringing Elakri, as well as the first and third planets, into its protective embrace. The fleet's job was to keep the Rasu outside of that perimeter until activation, which meant everyone beyond it would be left behind. They weren't the only ones. The government had issued a quiet evacuation order for the extrastellar colonies 3 days earlier. Many had heeded it and fled to the homeworld, but tens of millions had not. Liren wished them well. By all rights, he shouldn't be in this room. He wasn't a government official or military officer. It had been 10 years since he'd held any formal title at all, but Genova had asked him to be here, so he'd made an appearance. Besides, he wanted to know how events played out, but he wasn't staying. Admirals issued terse orders while tactical maps zoomed in and out of skirmishes. Directors monitored evacuation orders and prepared to implement emergency measures should things go sideways on the ground. Genova moved expertly among the chaos, for this was the world she thrived in. It was impressive to watch her work, as well as a not-so-gentle reminder to not get attached again. A single screen dominated the far wall of the Situation Room, its view the launch pad in the mountains. A countdown clock dwindled toward 0. In the panic triggered by the Rasu's advance, Corners had, of necessity, been cut. Dr. Kinzu said it was ready, said it would work, though the list of unknowns remained lengthy. But they were out of time. A hushed silence fell upon the room as the countdown reached 0 and the machine's engines fired. This part ought to be a given, for they'd been launching craft into space for millennia now. The tricky part came in 40 minutes, assuming they succeeded in keeping the Rasu at bay for that long. The fleet's numbers began to dwindle, and the air in the Situation Room grew thick with frustration. Seconds alternately raced by and slowed to tick, like the flow of polar glaciers. On the far wall, the upper hemisphere of the sun writhed in swollen fury on the Piega Straits horizon. An entire wing of Rasu tripped an antimatter firewall past the fifth planet, and half the screens above the war table flashed white from the blast. When images resumed transmitting, they showed different vantages. From the previous cams, and the warships that carried them were gone, having bought Elakri precious additional time. The new clock, the one counting down to activation, rolled beneath 10 minutes. And Lirin pushed off the wall he'd been quietly occupying to approach Genova. He caught her on her way across the room and laid a hand on her arm. "I'm going to watch the rest of the show from up there." She nodded tightly. "I understand. Come with me." A hint of conflict passed across her countenance before she shook her head. "I can't. I have responsibilities here, and they'll be either for naught or irrelevant in 9 minutes and 24 seconds. I'm sorry, Lirin. It's fine. Good luck." He turned away from her and went into the hallway, where he opened a spaziporta and activated the sphere as he walked through. He chose a spot 40 megameters off the far side of Elakri with the sun at his back. He was here because he wanted to see the stars, wanted to feel the weight of an endless cosmos pressing in on him one last time. Off to his left, the Norsine-Aki merger, Kilonova, was a faint smudge of orange-tinged light, and somewhere beyond his vision, men and women gave their lives so others could survive. He didn't point the sphere's telescope at the battle, however. He'd witnessed enough death for this week. Instead, he simply breathed in the vastness of it all, and the scent of Genova's perfume as she appeared at his side. "What about your responsibilities?" "They can wait. I didn't want you to be alone." He didn't have anything to say in response, so he just put his arm around her shoulder. The countdown rolled to 0. There was no explosion, no burst of energy, or roiling shockwave, or even sensation of motion, as the Pieste rent apart the space-time manifold and slipped inside, then stitched it up. The stars merely went out. He exhaled against the suffocating oppressiveness of so much blackness and looked behind them. Their sun still shone, its rays gleaming off the aquamarine oceans of Elakri in a familiar pattern. He wasn't alone, but his people were, alone in a minuscule universe of their own making. He dropped his arm from her shoulder and stepped away. "You should get back to it." "Will you be okay?" Would he? Lirin judged the tumult overtaking his thoughts, then smiled. "This isn't forever. One day, when the threat has passed or we've discovered a way to defeat this enemy, we'll go back, and the stars will return." This has been Extinguishing the Stars, written by G.S. Jensen, narrated by Piper Down. Copyright 2024 by G.S. Jensen. Production copyright 2024 by G.S. Jensen.